Right. So the next section we're going to talk about here is titled The Impact of the National Debt. And I have a little silly conversation between countries that I used as part of my document that I made for this section. So here we have the USA and China talking. And the USA says, why aren't you buying our debt anymore? And China said, because you owe too much and you're borrowing too much. The USA says, well, how are we supposed to pay our bills then without borrowing money from you or whoever? It doesn't have to be China. That's just part of the little joke, maybe. And China says, well, raise your taxes or cut programs. Or maybe raise interest rates so I can get a better percentage back on my investment. And the USA says all options are bad. And I think that's the bottom line to this whole conversation, is that when you run your debt so high that people, that countries or banks or whoever we borrow money from stops letting us borrow money from them, all options are bad. There are no good options to solve the problem. And the key is to solve your problem before it gets that far. Okay? And we'll talk in our next section about some ways about how to solve that problem. The book also mentions that if the government debt keeps going up, that it will have no choice but to raise taxes. Maybe that's the case, right? Maybe the answer is raising taxes. But if that happens, then you take the money out of your citizens' hands and you give it to the government, which means there's less spending power, which means that companies and our country will see less money in that old circular flow of economics, because more of that money is going to be taken out of the circular flow and put into the government pockets to pay down the debt. And that hurts everyone. Could also raise interest rates, which would mean more people are willing to loan us money. And I want to talk about that point for a section, because during the Great Recession, a few countries, I remember it was like Portugal, Ireland, England, Italy, Greece, and Spain of England. 5 countries were running such a high debt that banks were going to stop loaning them money. And if we say now that, I don't know, quarter, 20% of our yearly spending we have to borrow, which is probably too high. That's currently how it is, or how it was before the COVID era. Different era, but this was before that era. In Trump's last year before COVID, 2019. That means that we rely on that, on 20% of our money comes from borrowing. What happens if people stop loaning us money? We're going to have to raise taxes by 20%, or we're going to have to make 20% cuts to programs. In the case of Greece, they didn't want to do either. And it almost reminds us of Argentina in the early 2000s, who defaulted on their debt, and then no one would loan them money at all for years. And their credit rating as a country, yes, countries have credit ratings too, not just me and you, but their credit rating as a country went down. And then when they did get offered money, it was at a higher interest rate. So right now, if I went to borrow money from the bank, I have good credit and they would give me the best possible rate for an individual. I'm not getting the rate that rich banks and companies are getting. But if you're regularly defaulting on loans, you're going to get a much higher interest rate if they even let you borrow money from the bank. And the same is kind of true for countries. Argentina got nothing for a while, and then they started paying in really high interest rates, and they still aren't where they could be. They're still paying more than the US, or a higher interest rate than the US when they borrow money. But Greece couldn't borrow any money. So they had to go to the EU, which they're part of, and Germany and France, who have the real money in the EU, especially since Britain left. Britain was always half in, half out. And say, hey, can we borrow some money to pay our bills? And they said, you got to make changes. And they actually went into Greece's spending, right? They went into their financial accounts and said, I don't want you giving money to retirees until they get to be 65. It used to be, I don't know, was it 55? Greece was very generous to their people. And you need to start giving less money here. And we're going to lower benefits here. And you can't offer this to your citizens. And they actually took control of Greece's finances for a second in order for Greece to get the money it needed to even survive. Okay. And then the other countries, your Portugal, Ireland, Italy, and Spain saw this and said, we're going to make changes now too, because we don't want to be in that spot. No one wants someone else running their finances. Everyone wants to be able to make their own choices. And if people stop loaning you money, at some point, another country could tell you what you can or can't spend on. And that's a horrible situation. Now, we're nowhere near that. But we don't want to get there. Another thing is we're spending currently, I think I said 8 to 9% of our budget on interest on the debt. But as we borrow more, especially now that we borrowed so much for this COVID thing, COVID shutdown, probably necessary. I'm not that high an economist. Well, now we're going to be paying more money to pay the interest on the debt, the minimum payment, right, that we have to make to our creditors. We never pay it down, which means we'll have less money for other things. And since we already owe a certain amount for Social Security, and Medicare, and Medicaid, insurance programs, and that we looked at it, we said that only leaves about a third of the budget, which is defense and everything else. And some people are afraid that would mean we'd have to start dramatically cutting defense. And then that could make us more susceptible to being attacked and would make us a weaker country. So all of these options, all of the what ifs about not handling our finances well and borrowing too much are bad options. Now, before we get too upset, remember, we have the highest GDP in the world. We make the most money out of everyone. $22 trillion a year GDP, and our government pulls in, $4 trillion a year in taxes. So we're also the richest guys in the world, and girls. Because we make so much and sell so much and have such a high GDP, it's like, the rich guy can take more money in loans than I can. I can't go to the bank and be like, hey, can I get a quick 10 mil so I can build this factory? I got this great idea, right? I'm going to pull it off. Can you give me 100 mil? Right? They laugh in my face. But when Elon Musk says that, they say, here you are, sir, because they think he'll pay it back. And they look at me and go, you can't pay it back. Same thing for us. So because our GDP is so high, we have less to worry about. There's also that underlying threat that Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security for the young, for you guys, could be cut up to 70%. And when you look at those being, I'm going to call it $3 trillion a year, a 70% cut could save us $900 billion a year. But that would also mean that your paychecks when you get old will be 70% less, and that the coverage you get in your health insurance will be 70% less good. And that's not good either. So the best bet is to try and take care of our finances while we're still ahead and not get into such massive debt that any of these things have to start happening to us.